Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'm going to be showing you guys an absolutely broken AP Techno build that is one of, if not the best build in the game. With a far from perfect setup, this build can kill bosses faster than pretty much every other build in the game, and you can actually set it up to do significantly more boss damage than I'm doing here if you wanted, with the perfect build being able to kill the Arbiter in under 5 seconds. Unfortunately, I don't have the perfect gear, but as you can see, the boss killing is absolutely insane regardless. Not only that, but clearing out mobs in Trials of Tari Guitar or even Expeditions is incredibly fast and super easy as well. This build is not only super easy to use, but it's incredibly easy to set up gear-wise as well. You really only need a few things to get the build going, and after that, it's just optimizing it so you can kill things slightly faster. Overall, AP Techno is an amazing choice and is easily in the top 3 for the best classes in the game, next to this Pyro build that I'm working on and will probably release soon. If you guys are interested in seeing that, please let me know in the comments, and if you do, make sure to subscribe. But also Anomaly Power Devastator, which is literally just abusing bugs. The fact that this build is as good as those, if not better, is insane. Techno is super crazy, and I'm really excited to show it to you guys. Before I get into the video, I want to give a big thanks to today's sponsor, Heroes of the Dark. If you haven't yet heard of it, Heroes of the Dark is an impressively high-quality, free-to-play strategy RPG game that's available on iOS, Android, and PC. The game is set in a Victorian world full of lands to explore and mysteries to uncover. Not only is there a giant amount of content to sink your teeth into, such as super epic boss fights, exciting 5v5 combat, and even PvP battles, but the graphics look fantastic too. With an amazing looking world and a wide variety of different champions, you'll always have something to do in Heroes of the Dark. You can even upgrade and customize your own mansion for special rewards, which is quite interesting and pretty important, as basically your mansion is the heart and soul of your empire. You obtain essential resources here and can hide them in the vault to protect from some invaders. You also have an infirmary in your mansion to heal injured heroes and many other rooms to explore and upgrade. Personally, my favorite thing about Heroes of the Dark is collecting as many heroes as humanly possible. As a first time player, it was a ton of fun trying available heroes out in both PvE and PvP content. Since the heroes are all so unique and offer different benefits to help me in combat, I'm always testing the perfect combinations of heroes. On top of that, there are many ways to level up and improve my heroes, which really makes it feel like a true RPG game and always gives me something to be striving for. If you're interested in Heroes of the Dark, there's never been a better time to download it. By clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen, you can get a free Vampire Countess Magla to get your journey started in Tenebris. Just make sure to check the link in the description, and a huge thanks to Heroes of the Dark for sponsoring this video. Alright, let's just get into the build. Real quick, I want to mention that tomorrow I'm actually going to be doing a subathon event over on Twitch, so if you guys are interested in getting some free carries, helping support me, just hanging out, I would appreciate you guys checking me out. Also, I stream pretty much every day on Twitch, so feel free to follow if you're interested in that sort of thing. Also, I want to mention that I am not on my account for this video. I'm on my friend Maffine's account. Big thanks to him. The reason for that is that upgrading your gear in this game is incredibly expensive, and on my Techno, I've been playing Firepower the whole time. I set up the turret build and I was able to do pretty good with it. The problem is that my gear was like level 55, level 60, and my Techno's level is like 68 or something like that. So super underleveled, and it would just take me forever to get all the materials, while Maffine's character pretty much has the same gear but is actually leveled up. And even then, this build could still be drastically improved upon with just a few different things. But anyways, let's just get into the skills. So the main thing that you want to be using with this build is going to be Cryo Turret and Blighted Turret. These are going to be your main damage sources while taking advantage of some stuff in the Pax Tree, which we'll of course talk about. The third skill is interchangeable. I'm currently using Cold Snap. The reason for this is that it's going to give us a lot of AoE potential. Pairing Cold Snap with Icicle Storm is going to give you a whole bunch of AoE. However, if you don't really want to use Cold Snap and you want the build to just absolutely melt bosses, highly recommend putting on Blighted Rounds, and then you could swap out some of the Cold Snap mods for some Blighted Round mods to increase your boss damage. But with this build, I like it to be a bit more versatile, so I'm going to keep Cold Snap on. The 2 turret skills, pretty self-explanatory, not much to really say there. In terms of the class tree, the main notable nodes here that are interesting are exposing Toxin. Every time that we're going to inflict Toxic, we're also going to inflict Vulnerable. The reason that you want to use this rather than inflicting Vulnerable whenever we freeze is because every single skill is actually going to inflict Toxic with the Lethal Devices Pax node, which we'll talk about in a second here. Otherwise, pretty much everything else in the skill tree is pretty self-explanatory. We're just getting a whole bunch of additional damage when enemies are frozen, and that's pretty much the main crux of the build, is everything is going to be frozen, as well as afflicted with Toxic. We're also getting some additional anomaly power every time that we activate a gadget skill, which is going to be our Cryo Turret or Cold Snap. And then we also just deal some extra damage when enemies are below health, get a little bit of extra AP, and then every time that we activate a decay skill, we're getting some extra AP as well. If you feel like you want some more survivability, which honestly you really don't need with this build because you have so much survivability as it is, you could take off this one node disturbance coating, and then you could put it into some more armor, or potentially some more healing with medical unit. Or you could swap out the freeze last longer node for some more armor as well. kind of up to you, but generally you have so much survivability with all the skill leech and all the additional healing and stuff by default. I don't really think it's necessary. Alright, let's get into the Pax Tree. All this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty much just going to give you extra damage. Initial Striker is just AP, Painkiller, Health Regen, Permanence, inflicts random toxic or random status effect on enemies that are inflicted with toxic, and then pair that with the section. We just do extra damage to enemies that have statuses on them, and we're always going to be inflicting both toxic and freeze at the same time, so we get a good amount of value from dissection as well as permanence inflicting some random status effect. The main thing that's worth taking note of here is lethal devices. This is going to do roughly like half of our damage. It's pretty insane. Basically going to make it to where any of our gadget skills are going to inflict toxic by default, as well as inflicting whatever they're already doing. So our cryo turret is not only going to inflict freeze, but it's also going to inflict toxic, and then it's going to, every time that the enemy is hit with a toxic, it's going to deal 5% of your anomaly power as damage. The reason that this is so good is because we're scaling our AP really high, and this is just going to make lethal devices do an insane amount of damage. Pair this with a lot of mods that increase how fast our turrets shoot. Not only is our turrets going to do a bunch of damage, but it's also going to proc lethal devices over and over and over again, dealing a crazy amount of damage. Forgot to mention Ascension Points. You want to prioritize anomaly damage and then anomaly power, and then after that, probably either elite damage or status power here. After that, it doesn't really matter all that much. You don't really need cooldown reduction because you're going to be hitting the cooldown cap anyway just by having cooldown reduction on a few pieces. If you didn't know, cooldown reduction cap is like, I think 60%. It's either 50 or 60%, and we're at 90%. So don't really worry about cooldown reduction unless you're very far from the cap. In terms of how you want to set up the build, it's pretty self-explanatory. Let's talk about the weapons real quick. So the main thing when it comes to the weapons is you just want one that's going to have status power, and then you want two mods, Mage's Rage and Fortress. I think Mage's Rage is a bit better than Fortress, but ideally you want both of these. Both of these are going to give you a whole bunch of extra damage and really, really good. The reason that you want status power is because with a certain mod, we're going to be converting that status power into additional damage for our turrets. However, it isn't mandatory, but it is pretty helpful. For the third mod, you can use whatever. We have Ultimate Storm Whip here because Thunderbird just happened to roll with Fortress on the bottom and has status power, so it's pretty good. However, you could get anything that's pretty good damage-wise. You mainly just want the extra damage for mobbing. Omen isn't a terrible option as well, however, it's significantly not as good as it used to be, but it could be particularly good for bossing if you're able to fit in Tainted Blood paired with Omen inflicting bleed, and that also giving us an additional status effect, as well as it making the boss take 10% increased damage. But I don't really have a great Omen weapon. My Death Shield isn't all that bad, but it doesn't have status power. Ultimately, just look out for Mage's Rage and Fortress, and then whatever third mod you're able to get your hands on is probably fine. For this build, we're going to be using 3-piece Technomancer. This pairs literally perfectly with the build. Every time that we use a turret skill, which we're going to be using all the time, it's just going to increase our overall turret damage. You can get this stacked up very quickly, and it's going to give you 50% extra turret damage, which is just absolutely ridiculous. At the end of the video, I'm going to have an infographic of all of the mods so you guys can easily reference it. But for now, let's just talk about the mods, the ones that you want to look out for, the ones that I think are mandatory, etc. And when it comes to which 3 pieces of Technomancer you actually want, ideally you want chest, helm, and then legs. The reason for this is because all of those are going to roll with anomaly power and status power, which are the 2 best stats for this build. The gloves roll with pretty good mods on them, however they don't have anomaly power. I'm using the gloves because with this build I wasn't able to get perfect legs, but in an ideal world, if you were able to get some really good gloves that had anomaly power, you could then get some perfect legs and then pair that with the build. You'd also want some purple boots. Mine are unfortunately really bad. Not only do I have a dead mod on them, but it's also max health instead of anomaly power, and there's no status power. So like I said, this build has a massive amount of room for improvement. When it comes to the mods, the helmet is always going to roll with double trouble, which is really good. It's going to increase how fast your cryo turret shoots, and cryo turret ends up doing about half of your overall damage and is your main source of damage when it comes to mobbing. So getting double trouble here is insanely good. It's going to proc lethal devices more, and your cryo turret just does an insane amount of damage. Icicle Storm here you could swap off if you wanted something more oriented toward bossing. Like I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to use Blighted Rounds for bossing instead, you could put on something like Alchemical Mastery or To the Bone instead of Icicle Storm, and that'll give you a whole bunch of extra boss damage. But we're using Icicle Storm because it's really good for AoE. For the third mod, I just have Euthanizer, deal extra damage against enemies with Toxic, and of course we're going to be afflicting Toxic 24/7, so Euthanizer is a must-have. When it comes to the chest, we're using Long Winter to increase the radius of our Cold Winter, or our Cold Snap. Again, if you're not using Cold Snap, you could very easily swap this for a Blighted Round mod. The next mod on here is a bit unfortunate. You could make the argument that maybe you wouldn't want to use a chest and you want to use a helmet, chest, and then helmet, gloves, and then pants instead of the chest, because increased damage on cryo turret isn't really all that good because it increases it by a flat amount and it's not really going to scale up, but it's not a completely dead mod. And then we have Hail Shot, which is insanely good. It's a tier 1 mod. It's going to increase how much damage your cryo turret does based on your status power. And the higher that we get into the APOC tiers, the higher our status power is. I have 230% right now, but if I were to have better boots, my status power would be even higher, and that, again, the higher the APOC tier that you go, the more status power that you'll end up scaling. For our pants, we have Virulent Compound, which is going to increase our damage against elites that are afflicted with Toxic, so this is a no-brainer. We're going to be inflicting Toxic all the time, so that's just flat, huge amount of extra damage. And then we have Captain Hunter here, so 16% extra damage against elites, super, super good. And then we have Improved Coolant, so again, just increasing the fire rate of our cryo turret, so it applies lethal devices more and literally just does more damage. For the gloves, we have Shatter here, which is, really, really good, and everything's pretty much going to be frozen, not only with Cold Snap, but also our cryo turret, so 16% flat damage. Radical Therapy, of course, for just 8% more damage against enemies afflicted with Toxic. And then Arms and Anomaly is a super insane mod, just gives you a crazy amount of anomaly power whenever you land crits. Highly recommend looking out for Arms and Anomaly. And lastly, we have the Boots of the Borealis Monarch. These are really bad. I have Twins on here, which is insanely good. It's going to make it to where we can use 2 cryo turrets. This mod's absolutely mandatory. Then we have Cold Purification, which is literally useless. I would swap this for a number of different things. Then we have Unstoppable Force. There's a few mods around here that you could swap. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have increased damage. Instead of that, we would probably have Freezing Boost, so we deal some extra damage against enemies that are frozen. Or ideally, we could have no resistance against the Forgotten, which would inversely increase our anomaly power whenever we get some more resistance piercing with Unstoppable Force. Alternatively, Toxic Piercer is pretty good because Toxic does do a good amount of our damage. These boots that I actually have in my inventory would be better for this build because I'd be able to gain Toxic Piercer and lose Cold Purification. However, they are level 48 and it would cost me like 30,000 anomaly extract to level this up, so I'm just not going to deal with that. But all those mods that I mentioned are definitely ones that you want to be looking out for. I took some pictures of all of the gear so you guys can easily reference it. Hopefully you like it. It looks really terrible, but it's better than nothing, I guess. So for the weapon, like I mentioned, you just want to make sure that you get Status Power, Mage's Rage, Fortress, and then for the third mod, you just want it to deal flat damage. The Thunderbird is a good option for this. When it comes to the gear, like I mentioned before, Icicle Storm, you can swap that out for bosses, and Long Winter, you could swap for bosses, but the rest of these are pretty good. And then for the boots, you want AP ideally, and Cold Purification is literally going to be a dead mod. And then like I mentioned, these are some good other mod options if you're able to fit that into the build. Alright, so now I just wanted to showcase the build in a Catacombs run because there's going to be a lot of elites as well as just a few little mobs and then a boss, so I can kind of go over how you want to play with the build. This build is incredibly brain dead. Even if you have no idea what you're doing, you'll clear things incredibly fast. The main thing to understand is that the cryo turret lasts really long, and every time that you re-throw down a cryo turret, it's actually going to reset your cryo turret, so it's going to stop shooting for a bit, so you don't really have to spam it, but you do want to spam your decay turret. The main thing that you want to know about the blighted turret is that it's going to have really short range, and it's not going to do an insane amount of damage. It's mainly there to just proc toxic as well, or not proc toxic, but proc lethal devices, and to just give you additional techmonger stack. So you pretty much just want to be spamming out your decay turret, blighted turret, why do I keep calling it that, and then you just want to cold snap when there's a whole bunch of guys grouped around, shoot one guy and they kind of all blow up. And then every time that you see an elite, you kind of just want to throw down a cryo turret. You could literally just walk away like I do here, and then just throw another one to try to, get it to be within line of sight of whatever elite that you're trying to kill. And then that's pretty much it. In a perfect world, you would place your cryo turrets not really in the center of the room here. You'd probably put it to like the far right or the far left side, because the cryo turrets actually have an insane amount of range. The main problem with the turrets is that they take forever to be able to like turn around, so their target acquisition is pretty bad. The main time that you actually want to throw out new cryo turrets is really just when you are interested in repositioning them, just so that they are actually within line of sight of things and able to turn around a bit more quickly. But the cooldown on the cryo turret is really low, so I would make sure to just not spam it and just be mindful of where you're placing it. Otherwise, not really all that much going on. You kind of just throw down your blighted turret at the feet of enemies, cold snap whenever there's a whole bunch of guys around to try to blow them up, and take advantage of Icicle Storm, and that's pretty much it. When it comes to how you want to use the build for the boss, you use it pretty much the same way. You just want to throw down 2 cryo turrets, and you pretty much only want to reset those cryo turrets if they are for whatever reason not shooting the boss. The AI for the turrets can be pretty stupid. Ideally, you just want to throw down the turrets, and then you just proc your Mage's Rage or whatever on the boss, and then you keep throwing down the blighted turret and cold snap whenever you want just to get the extra AP. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward. As you can see, the boss got absolutely melted, and then he flew around the middle of the map, and then my turrets weren't able to hit him, but once you could hit him, you just do crazy amounts of damage. That's pretty much it for the build. Please let me know how you guys liked it. If you did, please make sure to drop a like, subscribe for videos similar to this one, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you guys would like to see in the future. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.